Welcome to Follow South Jersey's Follow Salem Podcast about the people, places, and all things good in Salem, New Jersey. In this week's episode, we talk with Chris Daggett. Chris is an independent consultant for the New Jersey Civic Information Consortium that funds local news organizations like Follow South Jersey. Chris is also a former deputy chief of staff for Governor Thomas Kean and ran for governor in 2009 as an independent. Listen as we learn about the importance of hyperlocal news on community engagement. Welcome to the Follow Salem Podcast. I'm Dean Johnson, editor-in-chief of Follow South Jersey, and today we have with us Chris Daggett. Hi, Chris. Chris is an independent consultant for the New Jersey Civic Information Consortium. He is also former president and CEO of the Geraldine R. Dodge Foundation, among other things that you have been doing for many years. Chris, how have you been today?
Good morning. I'm well. How are you?
Things are going very, very well. Before we get into all the things that you do, let's hear a little bit more about who you are.
Okay.
So you were born in Orange.
I was.
New Jersey.
Orange Memorial Hospital.
And then you ended up getting raised in Linwood in Atlantic County.
Yes, for about 7 years I was in Linwood. My father worked for New Jersey Bell Telephone Company.
Okay.
And ended up managing the office in Pleasantville. So that meant we had to move down here.
Right.
Moved to Linwood and spent 7 years here.
Okay. And then you went back up to North Jersey.
Yep. My father was transferred again, New Jersey Bell, transferred him to Newark to help the public affairs department. Mm-hmm. And actually he made 3 movies while he was part of that. When New Jersey Bell used to make movies called This Is New Jersey.
Oh, really?
And it was like a travelogue for the state. But anyway, He ended up in Newark and we moved to Basking Ridge.
Okay. That's cool, because I remember seeing those Bell telephone things when I was little on like PBS or something.
Yep.
There was a Christmas one that
Oh yeah, Bell Telephone Hour maybe or something like that.
Yeah, something like that. And your dad actually worked on that. That's pretty cool. So you were there. You went to high school. Graduated high school. Was it Ridge
High School in Basking Ridge, right?
And then you went off to college.
I did.
At the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill.
I did.
And you majored in interdisciplinary studies.
Right.
What in the heck does that mean?
So I came out of the 60s when the Vietnam War was raging and the early days of the environmental movement. Mm-hmm. There was a lot of sort of angst across the country, much not unlike today. And there was a lot of student activism of one kind or another across college campuses. Mm-hmm. And UNC had a group of people that were faculty and administrators and a couple student representatives that were taking a look at the whole curriculum and whether or not to develop what's called an interdisciplinary degree program. So the faculty and administration supported it and passed it, and I became one of the first students to develop an interdisciplinary degree in my case, I took courses religion, philosophy, and psychology, and I studied problems in education.
And what did you think the benefit of that kind of program would be?
It was just broad-based. It gave me a really well-rounded education. It's almost like a general studies type program.
Like a liberal arts.
Or liberal arts program, exactly. And but it sort of grounded me in the world of how people think about things, policy. There was a religious overtone to it in the sense of they were thinking about it from a religious perspective, not a particular religion, but just what the religious thought brings to this discipline.
Right. When you started college, did you have a career goal in mind?
I didn't. I actually started by majoring in math, and I moved to economics, and then I realized none of those were working. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. Right. It developed more because of that program that I got involved in, and that university-wide study.
Right, learning things that you didn't even know were a possibility.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
All right, so graduating college,
yep.
Then what?
Then I went out to, what was the town? Arlington Heights, Illinois, mm-hmm. and I worked for a private Catholic boys' school. I'm not Catholic, but I ended up, it was something put together by somebody I met along the way that asked me if I wanted to come out and be assistant to the principal there. So I lived on the 3rd floor with the Catholic priests and brothers, which if you're not Catholic, that's an experience to believe. And then while I was there, I met the Dean of Education at the University of Massachusetts at Amherst, and he invited me to come and get involved in what then was a very unique and interesting doctoral program.
Okay, and that's where you received your doctorate
in education. So I went out to the University of Massachusetts and ended up getting a doctorate there.
Right, and then after that?
After that, I came back to New Jersey and immediately got involved in a political campaign This is going to date me, but that was 1977 for a Republican named Ray Bateman, who was running against first-term Brendan Byrne, who was very unpopular because the Supreme Court had told the state that they had to equalize school funding, which was a landmark case and one of the most terrific cases that New Jersey's had. And Brendan Byrne, in order to fund it, had to institute an income tax, which made him very unpopular in New Jersey. First time they had an income tax. Everybody thought that he was going to lose. He had, I think, 2 or 3 of his cabinet members run against him in the primary in New Jersey.
Oh, geez.
And he, with only, I think, 35% of the vote, won the primary. And then, unfortunately, Ray Bateman did not run a very good campaign, and Brendan rallied and beat him. And so 4 years later, Tom Kean ran for governor as Republican. I got involved with Tom Kean. I traveled with him during the 1981 campaign, and when he won, he asked if I'd stay on and become Deputy Chief of Staff, which I did.
Right. And is that what lured you back to New Jersey from Massachusetts?
It was the 1977 Bateman campaign that lured me back, yes.
And you decided to stay?
Yep.
Right. How was it being Chief of Staff for Tom Kean?
So I was Deputy Chief of Staff, and it was... Tom Kean was one of the best governors we've had in the state of New Jersey. I think, as you know, he's still pretty much revered. He just had his 90th birthday recently.
Right.
And he was, those were the days when Republicans and Democrats actually worked together, and they actually got things done. Yeah. You could work across party lines. You could talk to people. You could talk about public policy.
Right.
And Tom Kean was a master at that. He brought Republicans and Democrats together and helped pass a number of landmark legislative bills that ended up dramatically improving the state of New Jersey. So I really enjoyed working with him. And while there, I got deeply involved in, it was the early days of the Superfund program.
Okay.
And I switched over and became cabinet secretary, where I was the liaison between the governor and the then 20 cabinet departments.
Right.
So in that capacity, the early days of Superfund, we were trying, because we're an old industrial state, we wanted to identify as many of the sites as we could, which is why New Jersey has the most Superfund sites in the country, partly because we were very aggressive at finding them, and then trying to get to apply for the pot of money, Superfund money, that was available to clean up those sites. And it was in that capacity that I got first involved deeply in environmental issues in the state.
So let's talk a little bit more about the Superfunds,
Sure.
Because it's interesting. There are some locally.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about some of them that were?
Sure, I can. I remember one in particular because the person, the congressman who was most responsible for the passage of the Superfund law was Jim Florio, and he was the South Jersey congressman that ultimately became governor after Tom Kean. Tom Kean beat him actually in his first race. It was the closest election in New Jersey history. It was 1,797 votes out of 2.2 million cast.
Wow.
It took a month to determine who was the winner.
Wow.
Back and forth with recounts and so on. But but Jim Florio remained a congressman and ended up passing the Superfund law. And so he, actually, the Superfund law was passed before he ran for governor. But in any event, one of the number one site in the nation at the time, not because of the contamination, but largely because Jim Florio made sure that on the Superfund list he had a favorite site, was the Lipari landfill in Pittman down in Gloucester County. And I can remember being involved in the early days of that, but most importantly, I left the state of New Jersey to become the regional administrator of the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency.
Right.
And ultimately, fast forwarding, I sat on the banks of the Alcyon Lake with, let's see, it was Congressman Florio, Senator Bill Bradley, Senator Frank Lautenberg, and I signed the record of decision to clean up that landfill. So, and clean up the lake. So that was the major South Jersey site that I remember, because at the time it was the number one site on the Superfund list.
What else did you do for the U.S. EPA?
So I was regional administrator for 4 years, which means that I ran the regional office. There's 10 regions in the country. The regional office is based in New York City, and it covers New York, New Jersey, Puerto Rico, and the Virgin Islands. It's an odd mix.
Yeah.
But most of the interaction between Puerto Rico and the mainland was New York, not Florida, because Florida, mostly consists of Cubans, and more so than Puerto Ricans. So that regional office in New York had the two islands as well. And, we oversaw all the work of air pollution issues, water, hazardous waste, oceans. It was in the early days of Superfund, it was a little bit like the Wild West because EPA was only 14 years old at the time when I was appointed, 1984. And it was a time that there was a lot of turmoil about the environment and environmental protection. But in any event, so I served there for 4 years.
Right. And how can you compare and contrast the work that you did for the U.S. EPA with the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection?
So I came back, Tom Kane asked me to return to the state and be the head of the Department of Environmental Protection in his cabinet. So I came back and did that. The big difference is that US EPA, there are many masters, if you will, meaning you have assistant administrators based in Washington, you have the EPA administrator based in Washington. In New Jersey, there's basically one boss, and that is the governor of New Jersey.
Okay.
And so in that sense, I had a lot more authority as commissioner of the DEP, even though the breadth of it wasn't as much as with EPA.
Right.
But in both cases, you have a big impact on many people across the state and or the region. In the
Can you
case
recall
of
some of that impact? What was some of that impact? What were some of the initiatives that you recall during your
Oh
era
my
there?
gosh. Probably one of the most visible issues of the time, at least when I was DEP commissioner, was the time when we had a lot of garbage washing up on the beaches of New Jersey.
What dates are these? We're looking at what year?
This was 1988 and 89.
All right.
There was a lot of debris that washed up almost daily from the ocean onto the beaches. And then we had, but those are the days when we didn't have those claw machines that would clean the beaches and the sand. There was litter all over the streets of New York, and when it rained, it would rain and it would go into the sewers, and the sewers would dump into the rivers, and the rivers would end up the debris would end up under the Verrazano Narrows Bridge,
Right.
and would form a big plot of garbage, and then it would strip off, go down the Jersey shore, and then when the tides came in, it would wash it on the shore. That and the fact that people in boats weren't very good about handling the waste that they generated, so they'd throw it overboard. We had an enormous amount of debris. The harbors of New York had a lot of wood, and from derelict piers that had broken apart. They too ended up, by the tricks of wind and tide and current,
Right.
floating under the Verrazano Narrows Bridge, and the tide would strip it off a little bit at a time. So we had a 50-mile stretch of garbage that was maybe only 10, 20, 30, 50 yards wide, and then the tides would bring it in. So everybody thought there was a lot of illegal dumping. As it turned out, after we investigated everything, it was more a combination of all these things that were going on by individuals and this debris from the harbors and the streets. And we ended up in the summer of '88, and then getting the Department of Corrections in New Jersey here to take a bunch of prisoners and walk the shoreline of the harbors of New York. And we got the Corps of Engineers to jerry-rig some boats, and they picked up debris that was in the water, and literally almost in a season we stopped it.
Wow.
And it made a huge difference. And between that and upgrading sewage treatment plants along the shoreline and moving them from primary treatment to secondary and then tertiary treatment, we were able to clean up the water such that when I was a kid, you could hardly see your feet in the water. But today you can go up to your knees and higher and see the bottom.
Yeah, I remember as a kid growing up, and you really couldn't see the bottom. And now it's almost crystal clear.
And when I was a kid, air pollution, when you drove into New York, there was a brown-yellow haze that hung over the city all the time from the smog.
Yeah, smog.
Today, because of the aggressive air pollution controls that have been put in place over many decades, very few days is there a lot of smog.
Yeah, I remember as a kid watching the news, hearing smog alerts.
Right.
Or
smog alerts.
And now it's rare,
Right.
if ever.
So if you have the long view on environmental protection, and you need the long view because of some of the size of these issues, we've made enormous progress in this country on environmental protection. Still more to do. You still have issues of sea level rise and climate change and those sorts of things. But we've made just incredible progress in this country relative to any other country in the world.
Right. So then in 2009, you decided to run as an independent candidate for governor of New Jersey.
I did.
First of all, what made you want to run for governor?
I think I long sort of had it in my system from the time I came back in 1977. I'm a policy junkie. I have followed New Jersey policy, reading basically every day the Star Ledger when it was a newspaper coming to my driveway, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, my local paper. And I was doing a lot of higher education policy for Tom Kean, in addition to my other work for him. I just have been a policy junkie, and I got just sick to death of the fact that the two parties no longer can work together. Republicans and Democrats didn't work together at all when I ran for governor the way they did back when I first got involved in the 70s.
Right.
And it's only gotten worse in the 15, 16 years since I ran. So it's really disheartening to see. But that was why I ran initially, that between sort of having the bug to run and also the fact that both parties were not working well together.
Why an independent? Why not, the Republicans who you obviously were working for with Tom Kean, why not try to get into the party and fix it from inside as opposed to running as an independent?
That's a good question. I think at the time, the year that I ran, everybody thought that Chris Christie was the best thing coming. He was the U.S. Attorney in New Jersey, former federal prosecutor. And he had brought a lot of public officials and found the corruption that was in New Jersey at the time, and did a really good job of that. And people thought that that was the best thing to make him governor. When he ran against John Corzine, who was a sitting governor, the three of us basically, there were other candidates, but the three of us were the only ones that raised enough money to qualify for public financing. John Corzine didn't take that because he was wealthy enough and funded his own campaign. Right. Chris Christie and I took the public financing. John Corzine, terrific guy, but wasn't well received and well liked as a governor, and so it became the three of us running. But I wanted to make the case for the fact that the two parties couldn't work together, and we needed to bring a different view about how to approach things. And in the end, Star Ledger actually endorsed me. It's the first time they ever endorsed an independent candidate for governor. And if you read their editorial, it was a damning statement about the two-party system.
Right. So do you think that campaign kind of helped bring things together for the state?
Frankly,
no. You think it left an impression on them?
I think it made an impression, and for a while I was running at about 22% in the polls. Right. So I really thought I had a shot at it. But in the end, people go to the polls and they tend to vote for one party or the other. So did it make an impression? Yes, I think so at the time, but in the long haul, probably not that much of an impression, because the state, like many states, is basically a two-party state, and it's very difficult for an independent or non-affiliated candidate to win.
Right. And so now you're doing work with the New Jersey Civic Information Consortium.
Yep.
Can you, first of all, tell us what that is, the
Sure.
NJCIC?
So let me back up a little bit about local news, because after I ran for governor, I was asked to become the head of the Geraldine R. Dodge Foundation. Okay. So I became the president and CEO there, and I brought with it a passion for local news. So we added another program area to our work, which had historically been the arts, education, the environment, and poetry. And we added this area that we called, what did we call it? I've drawn a blank for a second, but the focus was on local news. Right. And one of our first grants was to create the Center for Cooperative Media at Montclair State University, which has become a state and nationally recognized entity that brings together local news organizations from around the state. They have some 200 or 300 members that do a lot of collaborative journalism. They do training programs. It's a really terrific program out of Montclair State. Okay. And so we funded that at Dodge for a number of years. But then in 2018, because of the collapse of journalism across the country that really began in the mid-2000s, the advertising model that supported journalism completely collapsed, and with the advent of the internet. And with that collapse, a number of local news organizations around the country closed. And so in response to that, New Jersey, with the help of a group called Free Press out of Washington that came here and helped lobby the New Jersey legislature, a bipartisan effort came together, and they created the New Jersey Civic Information Consortium, which is a standalone nonprofit entity, wholly independent of of any influence as stated in its in the statute. I mean, no one's supposed to influence our work. And we provide grants using state money supplemented by foundation money that we've been able to raise. And we provide grants to online local news organizations to help either start or build capacity so that they can deliver news, particularly in areas of our focus, which are marginalized communities and news deserts where there's no news.
Right.
In Salem County.
Right. So real quick, so full disclosure,
Sure.
NJCIC funds about half of the budget for Follow South Jersey and the
Yes.
Follow Salem podcast. So just to keep that out
Yep,
in the open.
we do.
So tell us about some of the different programs that NJCIC funds.
So we fund a wide range of things from urban areas to suburban areas. I'll get back and talk further about Salem, but we also fund training programs at the high school level. We have 4 community colleges offering certificate programs in journalism. We have a program called Documenters, which trains local residents to take notes at public meetings because, as you may know, literally hundreds, maybe thousands of school board, planning board, zoning board, town council meetings today not only don't have many residents, but they have no reporters.
Right.
So people are operating without any real oversight or scrutiny from the public. And so the Documenters program trains residents to go in and just document public meetings, take notes on them, and then have those notes edited and then made available to anybody who's interested in them, including news organizations. So we do training programs there. We also have on the board of the consortium are 6 universities. Those universities each have a representative. I actually represent Montclair State on the board and board chair there. We've now gotten the 6 universities that are members to start an internship program, which we just announced about a week or 2 ago, in terms of we're coming up to the final stages and talking about we had 60 applications and we chose some, I think it's 16 interns that will be paid interns for news organizations around New Jersey. So between that program and the Documenters, where we pay the residents to both be trained and to report, we have this high school, community college, university pipeline of training programs that we're offering, in addition to the grants we provide to online local news organizations.
How much are we talking about? How much is NJCIC giving away?
So to date, we've given away around $9 million, with another 2.7 we'll give away this year. We have gotten $500,000 from the state the first year, then we get $2 million, then we get $4 million each of 23 and 24, and then this fiscal year we have $3 million again. And what we're now doing is trying to get money for the fiscal year 26.
26, and we'll talk about that
Okay.
in a minute. So how do people get in touch? I mean, are you looking for, are people applying saying, look, I have this idea, and then you go from there, or look, I've started this and I need funding to maintain it?
Both. So we have had several open calls where we say, do you have a new idea? So we fund startup, early stage, and established local news outlets. So it really depends on people and their ideas. We do not tell people what we want. We invite people to tell us what works, because we found that one of the most difficult things is to develop the financial sustainability. No one really across the country has figured out how to on a long-term basis replace the ad business model, the advertising business model that used to support local news.
Right. And so what's your criteria for selection?
So it ranges. We've had a number of areas of focus, and our criteria is really, and it depends on which year you look at, and you could go into our website and see the kinds of things that we have funded. But we have a grants committee of the board, and the grants committee, first the staff reviews the grant applications that are made, and then the board grants committee reviews it, and then from there we go to the full board for final approval.
Right. Could you give me an example of a successful, local news?
Sure.
Outside of Follow South Jersey, of course.
Exactly, and we will get to Follow South Jersey because it is one of our more successful ones, but also Ridgeview Echo up in Warren County, and It's in a town called Blairstown, where a group of people came together because there was no real local news and established an online local news outlet that grew from just a town or two to now I think it's 4 or 5 communities. They I've done a terrific job there. The Trenton Journal, a fellow decided to start an online local news organization in Trenton, not for the legislature and the legislative activities, but for what's going on in the town of Trenton. We have a number of students who set up something called Slice of Culture in Jersey City, which is doing a terrific job. It's all youth-led. We have
what kind of stuff do they put out?
They put out stories about what's going on they're out of St. Peter's University,
Okay.
and they put stories about St. Peter's, but then beyond into the city of Jersey City as well.
Okay.
We've funded the Targum, which is Rutgers' student newspaper, because they've expanded and include a lot of work in New Brunswick itself, not just about Rutgers.
Right.
So it really is a wide range of things that we've supported.
Right. So you're concerned right now for your fiscal year 2026.
We are.
So can you tell me what the problem is?
Sure. The governor, the budget process is the governor proposes a budget every year, and then the legislature holds hearings on that budget, and ultimately the governor and the Senate President, Assembly Speaker work together at the end of June to negotiate the final details, and a budget is passed by the legislature.
Right.
This year the governor proposed to zero us out, actually, to have no funding for the consortium. So we're now working with the legislature. I've testified before the Senate and Assembly budget committees, and we're talking to individual legislators on a regular basis. Our biggest champion has been Majority Leader Lou Greenwald, who is in the Camden area, has been passionate about this from the beginning. He helped establish it in 2018 with his legislation, and he's been a great supporter ever since. On the Senate side, it was Loretta Weinberg when she was in the Senate. She retired, and now Vin Gopal has been probably the biggest leader in the state Senate side. So we're working with them, as well as I said, meeting individual legislators, trying to get the legislature to restore the budget item in the fiscal year 26 budget.
What would be the impact if it's not restored?
Oh, it'll be a big impact because virtually most of our grantees get the majority, if not all, of their funding from us. And so it would be a big blow to local news if we aren't to get the funding. So we're really hopeful to be able to get it again.
Right. Are you investigating other revenue sources?
Yes, we continue to talk with foundations. We're part of a national effort called Press Forward, which led by the MacArthur and Knight Foundations and Democracy Fund have raised $500 million to support local news. The vast majority of that money is some 85 to 90% of it stays in the states in which it is raised. There's a pool of $10 to $15 million that is different. They put out a program called the Infrastructure Grants, and they gave out a number of grants to support back office help in news organizations around the country. 6 New Jersey entities have been funded by Press Forward. So we're hopeful that if, for whatever reason, we don't get New Jersey funding, we can turn to some other foundations for help. But frankly, I'm a big believer that until we develop a new business model to support local news, we really need public support for news organizations. We're the only state in the country that does that right now, the way we do it here, by funding news outlets. But we need to do this here, and we need to do it elsewhere in the country, I think, to support local news.
So why is local news and hyper-local news so important to a community?
I talk about it in the framework of not only is it important for democracy, but it's important for communities. Communities cannot be successful without a way to communicate with one another, and local news historically has provided the information that allows people to talk with one another about issues of the day, to understand what's going on in town, and ultimately to build a successful community. So you can't have a successful community, in my mind, without local news.
Right, but how does local journalism impact like that civic engagement? What does it look like?
Because it basically reports on the activities of the community. Not only the social and arts activities, but what's going on in local government, what's going on in county government, and by knowing that information, people then get engaged in their communities. They don't tend to get engaged when they don't have it, when they're uninformed.
Right.
And so we need a trusted, stable, financially stable also source of local news to to allow people to be informed and ultimately get engaged in their community. So for me, it's community development, it's community organizing, it's community success when you have local news.
Right. So how does NJCIC help towns like Salem?
So unfortunately, Salem is one of the big news deserts of New Jersey.
And when you say news desert, can you explain what that means?
So a news desert nationally is defined as counties, and there's some 250 of them in the country, that have only one or no source of local news. Mm-hmm. In Salem, other than the Elmer Times, which serves only 3 small communities here, there is no local news in Salem County, none. Mm-hmm. So when we learned about that, we at the consortium came to Salem and met with some town officials, some nonprofit leaders, religious leaders, and we started by saying, how do you get your local news and why do you trust it? And then finally, what's missing from local news that you'd like to see? Mm-hmm. So it's literally building from the ground up by not us telling people what to do, but asking the community, what is it that you need in local news? What can we do to help you do that? And it was through that process that we were engaged when, unbeknownst to us, Hope Loft,
which is our parent nonprofit company,
parent of Follow South Jersey, which is based in Bridgeton.
Yes.
And we had funded Hope Loft in Bridgeton, but we then, unbeknownst to us, you came here and set up a storefront. And from that storefront, Makerspace was developed, which is where we are here now today.
Right.
And when we learned about that and talked with the Salem officials about it, everybody got excited. So we gave a grant to Hope Loft, a $100,000 grant, which the great news was it was matched with $100,000 from Robert Wood Johnson Foundation to build local news capacity here. And that is the Salem newsletter, which you have been putting out, and
this podcast.
But also Robert Wood Johnson gave an additional $900,000 to Hope Loft to develop this same idea in other counties, and I think you're going to be in Camden very shortly, right. And you're thinking next about Atlantic County.
Bridgeton as well.
And in Bridgeton, again, you continue your work in Bridgeton. So it's developing into a really strong local news capacity when there was literally nothing when we first came down here.
Right. How do you think local news organizations can establish trust in the neighborhood or within the community?
It's by engaging with citizens, talking with them. What kind of stories do you want to know? What is it what news is important to you for in your daily lives? Mm-hmm. It's building trust by talking with and engaging local citizens and building relationships that ultimately lead to the trust that lead to people saying, okay, yes, let's follow this organization and the news outlet that they formed.
Right. Misinformation is rampant on the internet. I mean, you look at what looks like a legitimate website, and it's just, and in parentheses they could be putting in that it's, a satire or something.
Right.
So, what are some of these challenges that our local journalists are dealing with, either political polarization due to misinformation coming out?
So the challenge today is the internet is the best thing that's happened in many ways. We can now find anything we want to know about virtually anything.
Yes.
The worst thing about the internet is we can find anything about virtually anything.
Right.
And so the issue is when people have literally hundreds of sources of information, how do we develop a source of information in a local area that's trusted, that's respected, that provides accurate information? Because on the internet, you can say anything you want, make up anything you want, and suddenly it gets a following. And we see that at the national level, we see it at the state level, we see it at the local level. And we need to push back on that by developing these trusted local sources, because that's the only way ultimately people will be comfortable with and feel like they're getting quality information is when they trust a local news source, and that's what we're trying to develop.
What do you think about the onset of artificial intelligence? What impact do you see that as having on local journalism?
Again, it can be a good impact and it can be a terrible impact. I think we're just learning, and I think people are just trying to figure out how to use artificial intelligence in news collection and news generation. We're at enough early stage of that, as I don't know how it's going to play out. I think it can be a positive thing, just as it is in medicine. We're able to review literally thousands of medical research articles to help figure out what's the next best medicine or how to cure a certain disease. Right. And we need to develop that same kind of good capacity of artificial intelligence, because it also has a side that can be very ugly. And we've seen that as well.
How do we engage the younger groups? How do we, not even the millennials, even the younger ones, the Gen Zs, if you will?
Again, I think we meet them where they are. You've got to talk with them, understand what it is they're interested in knowing, what are they interested in, what do they want to know about their communities.
They're getting most of their news from TikTok, and Instagram.
Yep.
Is that where we should be producing content?
I think to some degree, every news outlet probably has to have some presence on social media sites. They have to be on Facebook or Twitter or actually X now. But,
X, right, formerly known as Twitter.
on YouTube and on TikTok, there has to be some presence, but it's a big challenge because people are virtually on these phones all day long, and we have to figure out how to get them to focus on things that are affecting their lives in their own communities, not just some interested social movement of some kind. You want to figure out how do you get people interested in their communities.
Are you seeing any, from the NJCIC point of view, any innovative ideas, models that are coming out that's addressing that?
So the model, not so much addressing that. What we're looking at for a model of financial stability, though, is not just news outlets the way we used to think about them, the Star Ledger or the Atlantic City Press or the Camden Courier Post, but to think of news outlets in a broader way that says, and I lost my train of thought about it for a second. What we ask your question again? Sorry.
Yeah. About what was it? The the model, the innovative models.
Oh, I know, the new model. So one of the models for financial stability is we're finding that one of the most trusted organizations still within a community is a community development organization like Hope Loft, where they're dealing with food insecurity and housing and healthcare and those sorts of issues. And so what is happening, I think, to some degree, is those community development organizations have developed ways to communicate with their constituents and their people to whom they provide services. And we want to figure out, is there a way from that sort of basis of news about the community development work to expand it into general news about a community and form some sort of a news outlet around that. And that's what we've been working on with Hope Loft. We're doing it in conversations now. We haven't funded them yet, but we're in conversations with Isles and Trenton. And in Newark, we have funded an organization called Clinton Hill Clinton Hill Neighborhood. And in each of those cases, we're saying, you are a trusted service provider. How can we help you develop news capacity, building on that trust that you have to provide people with information? And I think there is where we can also engage young people who tend to spend their day on social media, but a lot of them are impacted by the community development organization. And if we can get them to understand the importance of getting good, trusted information out of those community development organizations, we could expand into news about the community as a whole.
Right. Do you think there's a benefit for, or even problematic, that a news agency would be a nonprofit versus a for-profit organization?
No, I don't think it matters. A lot of news organizations are turning to nonprofit, and they're converting to nonprofit.
Because of the dry up of advertising revenues?
Right, exactly. And so they're turning to other means to raise money through individual donations or foundations or corporations and so on to help fund their operations, because they're not being able to generate the money from advertising alone.
Right. So where's the what's the future look like for for news in general? I mean, again, 10, 15 years ago, newspapers are all over. Yes, they shrunk down, but not when we were younger. They were took a wide piece, and you had to learn how to fold if you were on a bus or a train.
Exactly.
Where's it going? Where is local news going in the future? What's it going to look like in 5 to 10 years?
I think the jury's still out. I think we're gonna have to see how this plays out. As I said earlier, I think without ongoing and sustained public support of local journalism, until we develop a new a new model of financing to replace the advertising model.
Right.
I think we're going to need to do it. This country started, in the early days of this country, public governments funded news outlets. And the advertising model only came into play 100 plus years ago. And we need to think about how we're going to replace that. Until we do, we need that public support. How that plays out is a really open question at the moment. I'm optimistic that we can figure this out, particularly if we start thinking about not only community development organizations, but where there aren't community development organizations, what about the local library? What about the local YMCA? What about other trusted entities that may be able to develop some sort of a news capacity? Right. And I think people increasingly will want to be able to thrive in their hometowns and not necessarily rely solely on national news to get their news. They want to know what's happening locally, and that gives me great hope in that regard. But I think the jury's out as to how it develops and over what period of time.
Right. Do you see more or less people going into the field of journalism?
Well, I think we have to think about it more as a field of media, because most people think of journalism in the old newspaper days. You went and you worked for a newspaper. But media now includes all social media, includes broadcast journalism, includes radio, it includes newspapers, it includes newsletters. And this, for example, Follow South Jersey, this is a newsletter. Right. And so we have to think about it broadly. And I think in that way, we will find that young people will get more and more involved. We were heartened by the fact that, as I said earlier, on the internship program we just started with universities, we got 60 applications for internships, which
for how many
surprised me. We had funding to support basically as many as 18, and I think we ended up with 16. Okay. So there is interest in young people, particularly for this broader issue when you look at media and combine that with journalism.
Right. What about citizen journalism? Yeah, we all have cameras, we all have phones. That type of reporting, is that a benefit? Is that dangerous? Is it a loose cannon? Rogue?
It's all the above.
It's all the above.
It's if in good hands and with proper training, it is the wave of the future, because, as you know, as you go out in the field today with the print reporters still, they are their own film people too. They will take the pictures with their iPhone, or they will put it on a tripod and they'll do a little brief 5-minute piece or a 2-minute piece with a news story. So I think it's kind of all the above, but it could also be used in a nefarious way. People can use it to start rumors and to do all kinds of things that aren't going to generate information to help a community.
Well, Chris, thank you very much for spending time with us. I
You're
really
welcome.
appreciate it.
Thank you, Dean.
It was an enlightening, really good conversation.
We covered a lot in a short time. Thank you.
Very
Thank
good.
you for having me. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. We've been speaking to Chris Daggett. He's the independent consultant for the New Jersey Civic Information Consortium, among other things. Chris, again, thank you very much. I'm Dean Johnson for Follow Salem Podcast. Thanks for listening.